After my husband's funeral, I went to my nephew's first birthday party. Right in front of the birthday cake, my sister, Mackenzie, dropped a bomb. She announced, "My son, Beau, is actually Brian's child. As his primary heir, I am contesting his estate and filing to claim half of every asset you think you own, starting with the value of this mansion." She even waved a will in my face. I said, "Oh, I see," and fought the urge to laugh. My name is Grace, and at 34 years old, I am a widow with a secret Mackenzie never saw coming. Welcome to They Never Expected Stories channel. I'm behind the wheel today, and as I drive, I'm reflecting on how some family members view your tragedy as their personal jackpot. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there? I'll be sure to read your thoughts once I pull over. Now, let's dive back into why Grace wasn't crying, but laughing. I did not scream. I did not reach across the table to tear that forged paper from Mackenzie's manicured hands. In my world, the world of high-stakes art restoration, you learn very quickly that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. Mackenzie stood there, glowing with a predatory kind of triumph, while our parents looked at me with that familiar, soul-crushing pity. I did not give her the satisfaction of a single tear. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for far too long, footing the bill for their happiness while they treated my presence as a taxable expense. I realized right then that our relationship was not built on love. It was a subscription, and I was finally hitting cancel. I took a slow sip of my water, turned on my heel, and walked out of that rental house without saying another word. The streets of Savannah were draped in Spanish moss and heavy, humid silence as I drove my SUV toward the historic district. People think grief is a fog, but for me, it was a lens. It sharpened everything. My husband, Brian, had been buried for less than 72 hours, and my own blood was already circling like a vulture. But Mackenzie had made a fatal error. She confused my quiet nature for weakness. She forgot that I spend my days uncovering the truth, hidden under centuries of grime and fake paint. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I pulled over near Forsyth Park, my hands steady on the wheel. I did not open my phone to look at her social media or check for frantic texts from my mother. Instead, I called James Wilson, Brian's old mentor and our lead attorney. The call was professional and cold. "James," I said, "the ambush happened. Mackenzie is claiming paternity and presenting a new will. I need the temporary restraining order on all estate accounts activated immediately." James did not ask if I was okay. He knew me better than that. He just confirmed the plan. My compassion had been a luxury my family had overdrafted for years, and the bank was now closed. By the time I reached our mansion on Jones Street, the emergency security protocols Brian and I had pre-authorized with our private banker were already hitting my phone. Access flagged. Accounts restricted. Line of credit suspended. Safe deposit access restricted. In a war for an inheritance, the one who controls the assets in the first hour usually wins the decade. I was not just defending a house. I was protecting the $10,500,000 legacy Brian and I had built, piece by restored piece. This was not revenge. It was accounting. I stepped into the foyer, the smell of old wood and beeswax normally a comfort, but now it felt like a fortress. I walked straight to the wall-mounted panel. "System update," I commanded. I navigated to the biometric settings. I did not just change the codes, I wiped every guest profile. Mackenzie's thumbprint, my parents' access, everything was purged. I watched the little red lights on the security cameras blink, acknowledging my command. My home was no longer a family gathering spot. It was a vault. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were about to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. Finally, I walked back to the carriage house that served as my restoration workshop. I turned the heavy iron key in the lock and stepped inside. The air was cool, smelling of linseed oil and history. I pulled the heavy canvas sheets over the projects we had been working on together, sealing the room. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating the cold clarity in my eyes. Mackenzie wanted to fight over Brian's memory. She thought she was entering a drama. She did not realize she had just walked into an audit. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. 11 years. That is 4,015 days I spent building a life with Brian. To Mackenzie, he was a target, a wealthy brother-in-law whose success she viewed as an unfair personal slight. To me, he was the only person who ever looked past the useful shell my parents had constructed for me and saw the woman underneath. I had spent my childhood being the daughter who did not need attention because I could handle everything myself. A role that became a prison without bars. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. You become so good at absorbing pain that people forget you can feel it at all. Our marriage was not just a romance. It was a partnership of restoration. While I brought old, shattered things back to life in my workshop, we tried to build something new of our own. For years, our lives were measured in cycles of hope and clinical despair. 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization. That is 4,000 hours of hormone shots, sterile waiting rooms, and a bank account drained of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I still remember the smell of that last clinic, a scent of cold ozone and hope that had been bleached too many times. After the 4th failure, the doctors were blunt. My body was exhausted. Another attempt would not just be a gamble on a child, it would be a gamble on my life. I was ready to keep pushing, to keep footing the emotional bill for a dream that was bankrupting my spirit, but Brian stopped me. He did not check a spreadsheet or consult a lawyer. He just held my hand in the quiet of our Savannah garden and said, "No more, Grace. I will not lose you for the sake of a ghost." 2 years ago, he had a vasectomy performed to ensure I would never have to face that physical trauma again. He chose my survival over his own biological ego. He told me that night, "Grace, you are my most precious legacy. I do not need a child to prove I was here. I only need you." We kept that medical reality private, a sacred boundary in a family that felt entitled to every corner of our lives. We were tired of the fertility tax my parents levied at every Thanksgiving dinner, the subtle barbs about our empty house. So, when Mackenzie stood at that birthday party, using a toddler as a prop for her $75,000 debt, she was not just lying. She was attempting to forge a connection to a man she never truly knew. She saw the $10 million, $500,000 mansion and the prestige, but she never saw the sacrifice. She thought she found a loophole in my grief, a way to audit my husband's heart for her own profit. She did not realize that Brian had audited her character years ago and found it wanting. He had spent his final years building a legal and medical fortress around me because he knew that in my family, love was always conditional, but his protection would be absolute. She thought she was the one holding the bill, but I was the one holding the receipt for a debt she could never pay. The silence from my phone did not last. By the next morning, Mackenzie had gone nuclear. She did not just want my house, she wanted my reputation. I watched, clinical and detached, as she transformed into a professional victim on social media. She posted photos of little Beau with captions like, "Fighting for my son's future against a woman with a heart of stone." She told the world I was a cold-blooded widow who was erasing my husband's only living legacy to keep a $10,500,000 mansion for myself. The comments were a bloodbath. Strangers who could not find Savannah on a map were calling for my head. But Mackenzie made one mistake. She assumed I cared about the court of public opinion. In the art world, people fake provenance all the time to sell a lie. I do not react to the fake paint. I wait for the chemical analysis. Then came the call from my mother, Patricia. Her voice was that high-pitched, frantic vibrato she used whenever Mackenzie had dug a hole too deep to climb out of. "Grace," she sobbed, "how can you be so cruel?" Mackenzie is terrified. She is in debt, Grace, real debt. $150,000. There it was, the real number, the actual motive. My sister had not fallen into bed with my husband. She had fallen into a hole with a bookie named Brandon. My parents did not even ask if the affair was true. They didn't need it to be true. They just needed a reason to justify plundering my stability to fix Mackenzie's latest disaster. They did not care about the stain on Brian's memory. To them, the truth was an inconvenience that got in the way of saving Mackenzie. This is the trap of normalizing cruelty. For 30 years, my parents had treated Mackenzie's malice as a personality quirk. They had binned her failures and labeled them misunderstandings, effectively training her to believe that someone else would always foot the bill for her destruction. They were not just enabling her, they were weaponizing her against me because I was the only one with a balance sheet they could plunder. I am not paying her gambling debts, Mom, I said, my voice as flat as a ledger. It is for the baby, Patricia shrieked. Mackenzie says Brandon is threatening her. She needs that $150,000 or Bo is not safe. Then she should call the police, I replied, because the next person she will be hearing from is my investigator. I hung up and walked into a nondescript office downtown to meet Detective Vance. He was a man who understood that in Savannah, everyone has a skeleton in their closet. Some are just wearing better suits than others. I handed him a retainer check. I do not want the highlights, I told him. I want the ledger. Every illegal bet, every secret account, and every detail on this Brandon character. Vance nodded, his eyes scanning the forged will I had brought as a reference. She is sloppy, Grace. Desperate people always are. Good, I said. Desperation is a loud signal. I just need you to capture the frequency. As I walked back to my car, the humidity of the Georgia afternoon felt like a physical weight, but my mind was a cool, dark room. My family thought they were playing a game of emotions and guilt. They did not realize I had already shifted the board to a game of evidence and consequences. Mackenzie wanted to use my husband's name to pay off her debts. She was about to find out that the only thing Brian left for her was a paper trail that led straight to a prison cell. I did not need a courtroom to know the will was a fake. I had spent 15 years identifying forged pigments and chemical inconsistencies in 18th century portraits. I brought the document into my carriage house workshop and flipped on the ultraviolet light. Under the violet glow, the truth screamed at me. The ink used for Brian's supposed signature contained a specific synthetic polymer, a signature fluorescent marker that only recently hit the market. It was a brand new formulation, proving that this so-called old will was written with a pen that didn't even exist when the document was supposedly signed. It was a modern formulation, likely from a high-end fountain pen Dave, the graphic designer, probably owned. It was a chemical anachronism, but I was not done. Brian was a man of systems. He knew that in a family like ours, paper could be burned, but digital footprints were permanent. I walked over to the tall case clock that had been sitting in the corner of my workshop for months. It was a masterpiece from the 1800s that Brian had been fixing as a hobby. He was not a clockmaker, but he loved the precision of the gears. I reached behind the pendulum housing and felt for the small, magnetic latch he had showed me once during a late-night bottle of wine. Just in case the world stops making sense. Grace, he had said with a wink. The panel clicked open, revealing a small, encrypted external hard drive. I plugged it into my laptop, my fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. The encryption key was our first anniversary date. The folder was labeled Insurance. Inside was a video file dated exactly 2 years and 4 months ago. I hit play. The footage was from a hidden camera Brian had installed in his home office after Mackenzie started showing up unannounced while I was at restoration conferences. The video showed Brian sitting at his desk, working. The door opened and Mackenzie walked in, wearing a silk slip dress that probably cost more than her rent. She was carrying a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses. The audio was crystal clear. She did not lead with a conversation. She led with a physical assault, draping herself over his shoulders and whispering about how I was too obsessed with dead things to appreciate a man like him. She told him that she could give him the child I could not. I watched Brian's reaction. He did not hesitate. He did not look tempted. He stood up so abruptly that she almost fell off his lap. His voice was a whip. "Get out, Mackenzie. If you ever touch me again, I will make sure the trust fund our parents used to bail you out is audited until there is nothing left. You are not a sister. You are a parasite." She screamed at him, then a vile, unhinged rant about how she would take everything he loved. "I will make her hate you," she had yelled. I closed the laptop. My breathing did not change. My heart rate stayed at 60 beats per minute. I looked at the ultraviolet light still glowing on the forged will. Mackenzie thought she was playing a game of he said, she said. She did not realize Brian had recorded the entire script. She was not just a liar. She was a criminal caught in high definition. My sister's $150,000 debt was about to become the least of her problems. The balance sheet was finally complete, and the debt was about to be called in. The air in the living room was thick with the scent of old money and impending judgment. Mackenzie arrived with our parents, Frank and Patricia, and a bottom-feeding lawyer she had likely lured with the promise of a massive contingency fee from a stolen inheritance. She walked into my house, the house she thought she already owned half of, with a smirk that did not reach her eyes. She threw the forged will onto the mahogany coffee table, as if it were a winning hand in a high-stakes game. "Today is about justice for little Beau." "Grace," she said, her voice sounding like a poorly rehearsed audition for a drama she was not qualified to lead. I did not touch the paper. I did not need to. I looked at the three of them, the sister who had tried to steal my husband's dignity and the parents who had provided the emotional cover for her to do it for 30 years. "You are right, Mackenzie," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, resonant clarity in the high-ceilinged room. "Today is about truth. But before we discuss property, we need to discuss biology." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the clinical reports from Brian's urologist. I watched as the color left my father's face first. He was a man of facts, and these facts were irrefutable. Brian had a vasectomy 2 years before little Beau was even conceived, I said, speaking clearly for the recorder I had sitting in plain sight on the sideboard. "It is biologically impossible for him to be the father." Mackenzie sputtered, her face contorting as she claimed the records were fake, but I held up my hand with the same authority I used when stopping a restoration project that had gone wrong. "And then there is the matter of the will. I have had the ink analyzed under ultraviolet light. It is a brand new ink formulation that only recently hit the market, used on a document you claim was signed several years ago." I saw their lawyer's eyes widen as he began to discreetly gather his briefcase. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he was not about to drown for a forgery. "But this is my favorite part," I said, hitting a key on my remote. The massive television in the sitting room flickered to life. The video Brian had left for me on that hidden drive played the silk slip dress, the bottle of scotch, and Mackenzie's desperate, calculated attempt to seduce her brother-in-law. We all watched in silence as Brian delivered his absolute, bone-chilling rejection of her. I watched Mackenzie collapse, her body literally shrinking as her illusion shattered. She had spent her entire life believing that power was a costume you could wear if you yelled loud enough or lied convincingly enough. She thought that because she was standing in this $10,500,000 mansion, she had somehow become part of its value. But as the video played, she had to face the reality that her power was a hollow shell. Without the truth to back her up, she was just a person with an empty wallet and a $150,000 gambling debt trying to buy a seat at a table she had already burned to the ground. I picked up my phone. "I have already notified the Savannah Police Department," I said, the words falling like heavy stones in a deep well. "They are on their way for the fraud and the forgery. You have 2 minutes to decide if you are going to wait for them or start writing your confession." My mother began to sob, but I did not feel the usual pull of guilt that had kept me a survivor for so long. My compassion was no longer an interest-free loan for their dysfunction. My heart was not breaking. It was finally, for the first time in my life, balanced. The legal fallout was swift and clinical. Mackenzie pleaded guilty to felony forgery and attempted grand larceny to avoid a 10-year prison sentence. The judge handed down a 3-year suspended sentence with mandatory enrollment in an intensive psychological rehabilitation program and a financial counseling course. She did not go to state prison, but in the social circles of Savannah, she was effectively exiled. The video of her betrayal had traveled faster than any court document, leaving her reputation at a net value of 0. My parents, Frank and Patricia, finally moved into a modest retirement community, learning for the first time in 30 years to live within the limits of their own pensions. I officially terminated the family emergency fund that had served as an interest-free loan for their favoritism. I realized that by always footing the bill, I had not been helping them. I had been subsidizing their blindness. My compassion was no longer a line of credit for people who only saw me as a resource to be plundered. I took the $150,000 I had successfully protected and established the Brian Preston Legacy Fund. Our mission is to provide grants and counseling for women navigating the grueling, lonely cycles of in vitro fertilization, the same journey that Brian and I had walked in silence for so long. Every time a woman finds the strength to keep going or the peace to stop, I feel Brian's hand in mine. This is the ultimate move of justice, turning a legacy of theft into a legacy of creation. Standing in the garden on a quiet spring morning, I have come to realize that the hardest part of a betrayal is not the lie itself. It is the realization that you were performing for people who never actually bought a ticket. I have learned that blood is merely biology, but family is a choice that must be earned every single day. If you find yourself in a situation where the people meant to love you are treating your kindness as a weakness, remember that you have the right to hit cancel on that subscription. Setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-respect. Sometimes, the only way to find your own worth is to walk away from people who are determined to keep you small. Brian's love did not just protect my house, it protected my soul by giving me the tools to stand on my own 2 feet. Forgiveness is a luxury you grant yourself so you do not have to carry their heavy luggage anymore. It does not mean you let them back into the house. It just means you stop letting them live in your head for free. I am no longer the useful daughter or the overlooked sister. I am Grace, a woman who understands that a well-built life requires clear boundaries and irrefutable evidence. The story of my husband's legacy is proof that preparation is the ultimate form of self-care. Do not forget to like and subscribe if you believe that every survivor deserves to find their own version of peace. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Take care and stay strong.